I should have known something was wrong when James started being nice to me again. After 15 years of marriage, I knew my husband's patterns. His kindness always came with a price. "Sarah, sweetheart," he said one morning, placing a cup of coffee on my desk. "You've been working so hard lately. Why don't you take a break?" My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 42, I was about to receive the inheritance that would change everything. My grandmother had left me her entire estate, valued at over $30 million, with one condition: I had to be deemed mentally fit when I turned 42. The inheritance would be null and void if I was declared mentally incompetent. James hadn't touched the second condition of the will yet, too focused on the money to read the fine print. If I was declared unfit, the entire estate would go to my grandmother's favorite charity, not to him. But I kept that detail to myself, watching as he played his game. "I'm fine," I replied, taking a sip of the coffee. It tasted slightly bitter, different from my usual brew. I pretended to drink more while secretly pouring it into the small potted plant beside my desk when he wasn't looking. "Just finishing up some work." "You seem stressed," he pressed, his concern almost convincing. "Maybe we should talk to Dr. Peterson again. He's really helped you before." Dr. Peterson, the psychiatrist James had suddenly insisted I see 3 months ago, right after my 41st birthday. The same doctor who, I discovered, had received several large payments from an offshore account linked to my husband. "Maybe you're right," I said softly, playing my part. "I haven't been sleeping well lately. Those cameras." James's eyes lit up, though he quickly masked it with worry. "Cameras? What cameras, sweetheart?" I gestured vaguely around the room. "The ones you installed. I see them sometimes when the light hits them just right." "Are you watching me, James? Is someone else watching too?" He reached for my hand, his touch gentle but his eyes calculating. "Sarah, honey, there are no cameras. This is exactly what I'm worried about. These paranoid thoughts, they're not healthy." I let my hand tremble slightly in his. "But I see them, and sometimes at night I hear voices. They're planning something, James. They want to take everything from me." The irony of my words wasn't lost on me. The only one planning to take everything was the man holding my hand, pretending to be my concerned husband while slowly poisoning my coffee and documenting my deteriorating mental state. What James didn't know was that I had been documenting everything too. The mysterious pills that appeared in our medicine cabinet. The weekly therapy sessions that Dr. Peterson never officially recorded. The sudden concerned calls from friends who later claimed I'd acted erratically at events I'd never attended. I had security cameras of my own, real ones, installed by a private investigator who specialized in cases like mine. They caught James tampering with my coffee, swapping my medications, and having late-night meetings with Dr. Peterson in our garden, carefully planning how to declare me unfit just before my 42nd birthday. "I think we should call Dr. Peterson right now," James said, already reaching for his phone. These delusions seemed to be getting worse. I nodded meekly, playing the confused wife perfectly. "If you think it's best, darling, you always know what's best for me." As James stepped out to make the call, I quickly pulled out my own phone and sent a pre-written text to my lawyer. "Starting phase 2. Be ready." The pieces were falling into place. James thought he was orchestrating my downfall, but in reality, he was walking right into my carefully laid trap. My grandmother hadn't raised a fool. She taught me to always be 3 steps ahead, especially of men who smiled too sweetly and helped too eagerly. I could hear James in the hallway, his voice urgent as he spoke to Dr. Peterson. "Yes, it's getting worse." "No, I don't think it can wait. She's talking about cameras again and voices. I'm really worried about her safety." I allowed myself a small smile. Let him worry. Let him think his plan was working perfectly. In just 2 weeks, when all the evidence was ready, when every piece of his scheme was documented and verified, he'd learn what it really meant to lose everything. My grandmother's second condition, the one James hadn't bothered to read, wasn't just about mental competency. It was about justice. If any attempt is made to falsely declare my granddaughter unfit, the will stated, the entire estate will be placed in a trust under her sole control, with explicit instructions to use it as she sees fit to punish those responsible. Grandmother always did have a flair for revenge. I heard James returning, his footsteps measured and calm. I quickly composed my face into a mask of confusion and fear. The game wasn't over yet, and I had to play my part perfectly. Just a little longer, and James would learn exactly who he'd married, and more importantly, who he tried to destroy. Dr. Peterson's office felt colder than usual that afternoon. James sat beside me, his hand resting protectively on my knee, a perfect picture of a concerned husband. Too perfect. Sarah, Dr. Peterson began, his practiced voice gentle but patronizing. Your husband tells me you've been experiencing some concerning symptoms. Would you like to talk about the cameras you mentioned? I glanced nervously at James, then back at the doctor. They're everywhere now, I whispered, my voice trembling. In the walls, the lights, even my coffee cup this morning. Someone's watching me. Planning something. James squeezed my knee. See what I mean, doctor? It's getting worse. She barely sleeps, hardly eats. I'm terrified she might hurt herself. I watched Dr. Peterson make notes in his leather-bound notebook, knowing exactly what he was writing. The same words would appear in the official evaluation he was preparing. Paranoid delusions, deteriorating mental state, potential danger to self. What neither of them knew was that my own recording device was capturing every word, adding to the mountain of evidence my legal team was assembling. Sarah, Dr. Peterson leaned forward. I think we need to consider more intensive treatment. Perhaps a short stay at our residential facility would help. My heart raced, though not from fear. This was exactly what I'd been waiting for. The facility? I asked, letting my voice quaver. You mean, a hospital? A very private, very comfortable facility. James jumped in smoothly. Just for a few weeks, until we get these symptoms under control. Dr. Peterson's colleague, Dr. Marcus, runs it. He's excellent with cases like yours. Dr. Marcus, another player in their scheme. My investigator had already uncovered his connection to James through a series of shell companies and hidden payments. I don't know, I said, wringing my hands. What about my work? My projects? Don't worry about any of that, James soothed. I'll handle everything. All you need to focus on is getting better. Getting better. What a convenient euphemism for being declared mentally incompetent just days before my inheritance was due. After the session, James drove us home in tense silence. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head, calculating how close he was to victory. My 42nd birthday was just 10 days away. That night, I waited until James was asleep before slipping down to my home office. I had to be careful. He'd installed his own cameras recently, supposedly for home security. Really, they were meant to catch me in moments of apparent instability. I used my phone's infrared detector to locate the blind spots, then pulled out my laptop. My private investigator had sent an encrypted update. Dr. Peterson's offshore accounts traced. Evidence of falsified medical records obtained. Surveillance footage of James's meetings with both doctors secured. Witness statements from pharmacy staff documenting tampered prescriptions. Everything was falling into place. But the final piece, the one that would seal their fate, was still to come. I opened a secure chat window. Me, is everything ready for tomorrow? P.I. All set. The bugs are in place at the facility. Dr. Marcus won't see it coming. Me, and the timing? P.I. Perfect. Your episode should coincide exactly with their planning meeting. I smiled, thinking about what tomorrow would bring. James and the doctors thought they were arranging my commitment to the facility. Instead, they were walking into a carefully orchestrated sting operation. The next morning, James made me breakfast. Eggs, toast, and coffee doctored with just enough psychotropic medication to make me seem unstable. I pretended to eat while actually slipping the food into a sealed evidence bag when he wasn't looking. How are you feeling today? He asked, watching me intently. I let my hands shake as I set down my coffee cup. The voices were so loud last night, James. They kept saying I need to protect myself, that everyone's plotting against me. I looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. They're not real, are they? Please tell me they're not real. His face showed concern, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. No, sweetheart. They're not real, but that's why we need to get you help, remember? Dr. Peterson and Dr. Marcus are going to take care of you. Will you come with me? I asked, gripping his hand. To the facility? Of course, he said smoothly. I'll be there every step of the way. Perfect. That's exactly what I needed to hear. What James didn't know was that at that very moment, federal agents were setting up surveillance equipment at the facility. Dr. Marcus had scheduled a treatment planning meeting for that afternoon. A meeting where all three men would unknowingly confess to their entire scheme. I spent the rest of the morning playing my part, growing increasingly agitated, muttering about cameras and conspiracies. By lunch, James was on the phone with Dr. Peterson, his voice urgent. It's getting worse. Yes, I think we need to move up the timeline. No, I don't think we can wait until next week. I hid my smile as I listened. They were so eager to commit me, they were abandoning their careful timeline. In their rush to declare me unfit, they were about to make their biggest mistake. At 2 p.m., James led me to the car, a small overnight bag packed with essentials. As we drove to the facility, I thought about my grandmother. She'd always told me that patience was the key to justice. Let them think they're winning, she'd say. The overconfident make the biggest mistakes. The facility looked exactly as I'd expected. Expensive, discreet, and perfect for hiding inconvenient people. As James guided me through the front doors, I squeezed his hand and whispered, "Don't leave me here alone." "Never," he promised, lying as smoothly as he'd been lying for months. "I'll be right back. I just need to speak with Dr. Marcus about your treatment plan." I watched him disappear down the hallway toward the conference room where everything was about to change. In exactly 3 minutes, their treatment planning meeting would begin, and every word would be recorded. I sat in the facility's plush waiting room, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, listening to the hidden earpiece that connected me to the surveillance team. Everything hinged on the next 30 minutes. Through the tiny device, I could hear James, Dr. Peterson, and Dr. Marcus settling into the conference room. The recording was crystal clear, another piece of evidence to add to my collection. "So we're agreed," Dr. Marcus was saying. "The initial evaluation will show severe paranoid delusions, possibly schizophrenic episodes. Given the immediate risk to herself, we'll recommend emergency commitment." "Perfect timing too," James added, his voice smug. "The inheritance requires her to be mentally fit on her 42nd birthday. Once she's committed, I can petition for control of her assets as her husband. The money transfers to me instead of that ridiculous charity." I smiled to myself. He still hadn't figured out that last part. "And the medication schedule we discussed?" Dr. Peterson asked. "The ones we've been adding to her coffee." "All documented as prescribed treatments," Dr. Marcus assured them. "As far as anyone can tell, we've been trying to help an increasingly unstable patient. The security footage James installed in their house helps too. Shows her talking to herself, acting paranoid. Perfect supporting evidence." "Speaking of evidence," James said, his voice dropping lower. "The payment arrangements we discussed." "Already handled," Dr. Peterson replied. "Same offshore accounts as before. Untraceable." That was all I needed. I pressed a button on my phone, sending a pre-arranged signal. Within seconds, federal agents were moving in. The look on James's face when they burst into the conference room was priceless. I watched through the facility's security feed as all three men were handcuffed, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror as the charges were read. Conspiracy, fraud, attempted illegal commitment, drugging without consent. I stood up, smoothing my dress, and walked to the conference room. Gone was the trembling, paranoid woman they thought they knew. In her place stood someone else entirely, someone they should have thought twice about underestimating. "Hello, gentlemen," I said from the doorway. "Having a productive meeting?" James lunged forward, barely restrained by the agents. "You set us up," he snarled. "You lying." "Lying?" I cut him off, my voice sharp. "That's an interesting choice of words, James. Should we talk about the medications you've been slipping into my coffee, or the fake security footage, or perhaps the offshore accounts where you've been paying these two to help you steal my inheritance?" I turned to Dr. Peterson and Dr. Marcus. "By the way, those accounts aren't as untraceable as you thought. Neither are the phone records, text messages, or the footage from my grandmother's house where you all planned this little scheme last month." Dr. Marcus went pale. "Your grandmother's house. How did you install cameras?" "The same way James did in our home. Except mine were legal, authorized by my private investigator as part of a federal investigation into medical fraud." I smiled. Grandmother always did have the best security system. The federal agent in charge stepped forward, holding up a thick file. "We have enough evidence to put all three of you away for a very long time. Unless, of course, you'd like to start talking about your other victims." "Other victims?" I discovered at least 5 other wealthy women they'd targeted over the years, all declared mentally unfit just before receiving significant inheritances. Their families had been eager to help with my case. James slumped in his chair, finally realizing the magnitude of his failure. The inheritance, he mumbled. Even if I'm arrested as your husband, I still get nothing. I interrupted. You get nothing, James. You never bothered to read the whole will, did you? If anyone attempted to falsely declare me unfit, the money went into a trust under my control. And trust me, I know exactly how I'll be using it. I pulled out my phone and played a recording. James's own voice discussing the fake symptoms, the drugged coffee, the entire conspiracy. This is what real evidence looks like, I said softly. Not your staged security footage or falsified medical records. Real proof of real crimes. 48 hours later, I sat in my lawyer's office, signing the final divorce papers. My 42nd birthday had come and gone, and the inheritance was safely in my control. James and his co-conspirators had taken plea deals, facing significant prison time. The news had made quite a splash in our social circle. Prominent doctor and socialite husband arrested in inheritance fraud scheme ran the headlines. But I wasn't interested in the publicity. I had other plans. My grandmother's money was going to better uses, funding a foundation to help victims of medical fraud and supporting women caught in similar situations. The investigation had uncovered dozens more cases, and I intended to help every single one of them. I kept one small reminder of the whole ordeal. The coffee cup James had used to drug me that last morning. It sat on my desk, now holding pens instead of poison, a daily reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't just exposing the truth. It's making sure that truth helps others. Last week, I received a letter from James in prison. He wanted to apologize, he said. Claimed he changed. Asked for forgiveness. I filed it away with the evidence, another testament to his manipulation. Some people deserve second chances, others deserve to face the consequences of their actions. James and his accomplices had spent years preying on vulnerable women, using their positions of trust to steal and destroy lives. Now they had the rest of their prison sentences to think about the lives they'd ruined, and the woman who finally stopped them. My grandmother would have been proud. She taught me well, patience, vigilance, and most importantly, the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the people closest to you can be your greatest threats. But she also taught me something else. True strength isn't in getting revenge, it's in making sure justice serves a greater purpose. I still drink coffee every morning, but now I make it myself. And every sip reminds me that I'm not just a survivor. I'm the woman who turned the tables on their perfect plan, the one they thought they could destroy but ended up destroying themselves instead. Sometimes I think about James sitting in his prison cell, finally reading the full text of my grandmother's will, realizing how completely he'd underestimated both of us. It makes me smile. Because in the end, he was right about one thing. I did need help, just not the kind he planned to give me.